Hello. I always thought my wife was bad at lying, but it turns out she was just bad at hiding her excitement when she thought she had outsmarted me. That smug little glimmer in her eyes when she mentioned the so-called business trip should have been my first clue. But I played along, nodded at the right moments, even feigned concern when she sighed dramatically about how exhausting these client meetings would be. The whole time, she thought she was leading me by the nose. But see, I don't do tears. I don't do emotional outbursts. What I do is strategy. And if she thought she could outmaneuver me, she had another thing coming. The real fun started when she made her little slip. Over dinner, between bites of steak I'd grilled to perfection, she absent-mindedly mentioned the trip had been rescheduled to next weekend. Funny, since she'd told me the week before that it was already set. Just a small inconsistency, nothing major, but I tucked it away. Then came the late-night texting, her giggling at the screen like a teenager, her phone suddenly facing downward whenever I entered the room. Classic. But the real nail in the coffin? The perfume. Not hers. Someone else's. That was my cue. Now, a lesser man might have confronted her right then, and there, started a screaming match, demanded an explanation. But I'm not a lesser man. I don't do theatrics, I do precision. Instead of accusing her, I encouraged her. Told her it was great that she was prioritizing her career, that I fully supported her going on this trip. She smiled at me then, completely oblivious to the fact that I was already 5 steps ahead. I started laying the groundwork immediately. First, I checked our joint bank account. Interesting. She had taken out cash. Not a lot, just enough to cover some expenses without leaving a digital footprint. Clever, but not clever enough. Next, I did what any man with a gut feeling and a little tech savvy would do. I checked her location history. Turned out, she'd been making detours after work, parking in a lot nowhere near her office. Once? Maybe an errand. Twice? A coincidence. But 5 times in 2 weeks? Well, that's what we in the business call a pattern. And then, the golden opportunity landed right in my lap. She had booked a hotel under her personal credit card, one she rarely used. Funny, since her company always handled accommodations for business trips. A quick call pretending to be an enthusiastic husband confirming a romantic surprise for his wife, and the front desk was all too happy to confirm her check-in details. Suite for 2. King-sized bed. Reserved for Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. The fact that she didn't even bother changing her last name for the reservation was almost insulting. At this point, I could have walked away. Could have just packed my bags, left a note, and spared myself the theatrics. But where's the satisfaction in that? No, she wanted to play a game, and I was more than happy to show her how it's really done. So, I booked my own little getaway for the same weekend. Different hotel. Different city. She wouldn't even suspect a thing. I made sure to be extra sweet before she left, kissed her on the cheek, told her to have a great time. And when she rolled her suitcase out the door, she actually believed she was in control of the situation. That was the last time she'd ever underestimate me. Now, I didn't follow her immediately. That would have been sloppy. Instead, I took my time, let her get comfortable. She probably checked into her room, freshened up, sent her lover a text with some cringe-worthy pet name she thought was secret. I let her have her little fantasy for a few hours. Then, I made my move. Dressed in my best, I walked into that hotel lobby like I owned the place. The receptionist barely glanced at me. Just another guest. No suspicion. I made my way to the bar, because if there's one thing I know, it's that cheaters love a pre-game drink before sealing their betrayal. And sure enough, there she was. Sitting at the corner booth, all dressed up, hair done in a way she never bothered to do for me anymore. Laughing. Flirting. With him. It took everything in me not to laugh at how stupid she looked, thinking she was getting away with it. But I wasn't here for a scene. No yelling, no violence. I was here to set the trap. I pulled out my phone, snapped a few casual photos. Not too obvious, just enough to capture the moment. Her hand on his arm. His fingers tracing the inside of her wrist. The way she leaned in just a little too close when she whispered something in his ear. Picture-perfect betrayal. I could have walked right up to her then and there, tapped her on the shoulder, watched her face drain of color. But no, that would be too easy. Instead, I left. Silent. Unnoticed. Because the real show? That was yet to come. There was a time when I thought my life was exactly where it was supposed to be. Nothing extravagant, nothing out of a fairy tale, just solid, reliable happiness. I woke up every morning to the smell of fresh coffee, because she always made sure to have a cup waiting for me before I left for work. I'd step into the kitchen, and she'd be standing there in her robe, scrolling through her phone, smiling up at me with that sleepy, effortless beauty that made me think, yeah, this is it. This is what I worked for. Mornings were quiet, filled with the comfortable routine of a couple that had been together long enough to not need constant conversation. I'd sit at the counter, sipping my coffee while she packed her things for work. Sometimes, she'd steal a bite of my toast, laughing when I pretended to be annoyed. I told myself these little things mattered, that even when life got busy, we had our moments. It was a good life, or at least, I had convinced myself it was. Weekends were ours. We didn't have a grand, adventurous marriage, but we had a rhythm. Friday nights were usually takeout and a movie, with her curled up next to me on the couch, her feet tucked under my leg. Saturdays were for errands, grocery runs, and the occasional brunch date where we'd people watch and make up ridiculous stories about strangers passing by. Sundays were slow, the kind of days where you stayed in pajamas too long and debated for hours whether cooking dinner was worth it or if another round of delivery was the smarter choice. Looking back, I realize now that the comfort of routine was a double-edged sword. At the time, I thought we were solid, unshakable. I thought that kind of quiet stability was the goal. But stability can be mistaken for stagnation, and I see now that while I was content, she was restless. The little things started changing before I even noticed. It started subtly, as these things always do. She began staying late at work more often. At first, I didn't question it. She was ambitious, dedicated. I admired that about her. But then came the nights when she didn't just work late, she came home exhausted, distracted. I'd ask about her day, and instead of the usual animated storytelling about office drama or the annoying client she had to deal with, I'd get a short, vague response. Same as always. Tiring. A kiss on the cheek. A quick shower. Straight to bed. Then there was the perfume. She'd always worn the same one since we started dating, something light, floral, barely noticeable unless you were close. But one night, she came home smelling different. Something heavier, muskier. It clung to her skin like a secret, and when I casually asked if she'd switched scents, she hesitated for half a second before shrugging it off. Oh, I just ran out of my usual one and grabbed whatever was at the store. A reasonable answer. I nodded, but my gut whispered something else. Her phone became an extension of her hand. She used to toss it onto the couch or leave it charging in the kitchen, but now it was always with her. She'd glance at it and smile, just a flicker, barely noticeable, but enough. When I asked what was funny, she'd say, just a meme. You wouldn't get it. I started remembering all the times she said she wasn't a phone person, how she used to roll her eyes when people were glued to their screens. But now, she was one of them, tilting the screen away whenever I walked by, setting it face down on the table when we ate. I didn't push. I didn't want to be that husband, the paranoid, insecure one. Instead, I told myself it was stress, that maybe she just needed space. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, because that's what you do when you love someone. There were other things too, things I brushed off at the time. The new lingerie she bought but never wore around me. The sudden interest in going to the gym after years of saying she wasn't the fitness type. The work trips that weren't technically new, but suddenly seemed more frequent. The way she stopped asking me to pick her up from the airport. I didn't see it then. I should have. The thing is, betrayal doesn't announce itself with a grand entrance. It doesn't kick down your door and declare war. It seeps in slowly, settling into the cracks of your life, disguising itself as minor inconveniences, small changes, things you barely question until it's too late. And by the time you do question it, by the time you start piecing it all together, the damage is already done. That's the worst part. Not the betrayal itself, but the realization that it didn't happen overnight. That it had been unfolding in front of you, little by little, while you convinced yourself everything was fine. That you let it happen. But here's the thing, I don't do self-pity. The moment I put all the pieces together, the moment I knew, really knew, that was the moment everything changed. Because if she thought she had been playing the game, she had no idea who she was up against. It started with something small. Something so insignificant that, in a different life, I might have brushed it off. But the thing about betrayal is that it doesn't kick in your door and announce itself. It creeps in through the cracks, waiting for you to look away. That night, I wasn't looking away. She was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine, her phone resting on the counter. I was in the living room, half watching TV, half scrolling through my own phone, when I heard it vibrate. Just a quick buzz, but loud enough in the quiet of the house. She glanced at it, then at me. I wasn't even looking at her, but I could feel the hesitation. The way she stood just a little too still. Then, With the kind of practiced casualness that only looks natural when you aren't trying, she picked up the phone, flipped it over, and turned off the screen. I almost let it go. Almost. Instead, I stood up, stretched, and walked toward the kitchen. She turned slightly, body angled just enough to keep the phone out of my view, and took a slow sip of wine. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She didn't flinch, didn't look guilty. Just smiled, too quick, too easy. "Just work." "At 9:30? She shrugged. "Yeah, some last-minute thing about a meeting tomorrow." It was a reasonable answer. One I probably would have accepted if it wasn't for the way she said it. Just a beat too fast, like she was already moving past the topic, shutting it down before I could ask more. So I didn't. I just nodded, walked past her, and grabbed a glass from the cabinet. I poured myself some water, taking my time. Long enough to see her glance at her phone again, hesitating just a second before putting it in her pocket. That was the first warning. Not the message itself. Not the late-night text from work. It was the small, almost imperceptible shift in her behavior. The way she moved like she was suddenly aware of my presence in a way she hadn't been before. I didn't say anything else that night. Didn't press. I just watched. The second warning came a few days later. We were sitting on the couch, watching a show, when her phone buzzed again. This time, she was quicker. She glanced at the screen, barely a second, before pressing the side button to silence it. I didn't even have to ask. She answered before I could. "Spam call," she muttered, not looking at me. And that was interesting, because I know how she reacts to spam calls. She complains. She rolls her eyes, mutters about how she's on the do not call list, maybe even answers just to mess with them before hanging up. But this time, she didn't even look at the screen long enough to see who it was. Just silenced it and kept her gaze locked on the TV, a little too focused, like she needed to prove she wasn't paying attention to her phone. So, I started paying attention for both of us. The third warning came in the form of a change in routine. My wife was not a gym person. She wasn't against exercise, but she always laughed at the idea of running on a treadmill, calling it a hamster wheel for humans. Her version of working out was yoga in the living room and long walks when the weather was nice. But suddenly, she had a new interest. "I think I want to start going to the gym," she announced over dinner one night, casually, like it wasn't a complete 180 from every conversation we'd ever had about fitness. I raised an eyebrow, but I played along. "Yeah? Since when?" She shrugged, stabbing at her salad a little too intently. "I don't know. Just thinking about getting in better shape. They opened a new place near work, and some of the girls from the office go there." "Which girls?" Another shrug. "You don't know them." That was an interesting choice of words. Because before, she would have listed names. Even if I didn't actually know them, she would have mentioned them. Instead, she kept it vague. "Unverifiable." "That's good," I said, nodding, watching her reaction. "I mean, you already look great, but if you want to go for it." She smiled, a little too quickly, like she was relieved. Like she had expected me to question it more. The next day, she left for the gym straight from work. I checked her location an hour later. She wasn't at the gym. She wasn't anywhere near the gym. She was parked in a lot near the downtown area. A place with bars, restaurants, hotels. I stared at my phone for a long moment, my mind calculating, considering. That was it. That was the moment I knew. Not everything, not yet. But enough. A late-night text she turned over. A call she silenced too quickly. A new hobby that just happened to coincide with unexplained absences. She thought she was being careful. She had no idea I was already 2 steps ahead. It was almost funny how quickly suspicion turned into certainty, how once you noticed the cracks, they spread like a spider web across everything you thought was solid. It wasn't a question anymore, it was just a matter of proof, and proof is easy to find when you know where to look. I started small subtle things that wouldn't tip her off: checking her phone when she wasn't looking. She used to be careless with it, leaving it on the counter or the coffee table, but now it was always in her pocket or face down next to her when she slept. The first time I picked it up, the lock screen had changed a new passcode, one I didn't know. Interesting. She hadn't changed her password in years, not once. Even when I joked about how easy it would be for someone to get into her phone, she just laughed and said she had nothing to hide, but now she did. Now she was hiding something, and that something had a name, a face, a schedule, and I was going to find out exactly who it was. The location tracking was next. She didn't know I had set it up months ago for safety reasons, at least that's what I told her at the time. She agreed absent-mindedly, didn't even question it. So I checked, and what do you know, her so-called gym nights didn't line up with the gym at all. Last Tuesday, she was supposed to be at her workout, but she spent 40 minutes in a parking lot 2 miles away from the gym. No businesses there, nothing but a couple of office buildings and a hotel, and what's more interesting, she never even mentioned it when she got home. Just walked in smiling, acting like she had been sweating it out on a treadmill, like I wouldn't notice the absence of that post-workout exhaustion, like I wouldn't see the glow on her skin wasn't from exercise but from something else, something more intimate, something that wasn't me. So I let her think she was still ahead, let her believe she was fooling me while I started planning. I tested her without her realizing it, dropped little questions into conversation to see how she'd react, told her my coworker was thinking of getting a membership at the same gym just to see if she'd panic. She didn't, but her face changed just for a fraction of a second, the kind of micro expression you don't notice unless you're looking for it. Then came the lies, little ones. At first I asked how her workout was. She gave me details about a routine she supposedly did, but she didn't know I had checked the gym's app and her keycard hadn't been scanned, and that day she must have realized I was watching her though, because the next week she made sure to stop by the gym just long enough to check in before heading somewhere else. Smart, but not smart enough. I checked our credit card statements, nothing unusual there. She was careful, paid for everything in cash, probably thought that would keep me in the dark, but I had access to her work email from when she asked me to help her reset her password months ago. She had forgotten I still knew it, so I logged in and started digging. Nothing obvious at first, just normal work emails, the occasional forwarded joke from a colleague, but then I saw a confirmation for a hotel reservation booked under a fake name, except she was sloppy. The email trail showed it was made using her personal email, the one I knew by heart, and the date, well, let's just say it perfectly lined up with one of her so-called late nights at the gym. So there it was, hard proof, undeniable proof that my wife, the woman I trusted, the woman I built a life with, was sneaking around behind my back. But see, I don't do drama, I don't do screaming matches or desperate confrontations. That's what she'd expect. She'd expect a fight, tears, accusations, maybe even a moment where she could twist things around, make me doubt myself, turn the tables. No, that's not how this was going to go. I was going to play her game, only better. I started collecting everything, screenshots, emails, tracking data. I even went back through our messages from the past few months, noticing all the little moments where she had lied, and I hadn't even seen it at the time. Then I set up a folder on my computer, labeled work files, and filled it with everything I found. The next step was watching her closer than ever, noting her tells, the way she reached for her phone too quickly when it buzzed, the way she always had some vague excuse ready if I asked about her schedule, the way she seemed more distant yet more affectionate at random times, like she was trying to balance her guilt with forced intimacy. I kept my face neutral, my tone calm, my actions routine. I kissed her goodbye in the morning. I told her to have fun at the gym. I smiled when she texted me those short, meaningless messages, staying late, don't wait up, love you, see you soon. I let her dig her own grave, one lie at a time. And when the time was right, when I had everything I needed, I would make sure she never saw it coming. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of ordinary midweek day where nothing big is supposed to happen, the kind where you wake up, make coffee, go to work, come home, eat dinner, and repeat. But this Wednesday was different. This was the day my suspicion turned into cold, hard truth, and the moment my world split into before and after. I hadn't planned for it to happen that way. I was still gathering evidence, still waiting for the perfect time to strike, but fate, or maybe sheer dumb luck, decided I didn't need to wait anymore, because the truth landed right in my lap, wrapped up in a neat little package with a timestamp and a location. It started with a notification. Her tablet was still connected to our shared cloud, something she had forgotten in her rush to erase the breadcrumbs of her betrayal. I had checked it before, found nothing out of the ordinary, just her usual email, shopping receipts, and random notes. But this time was different, because this time I opened it and saw a new message thread at the top of her inbox. No subject, just a name I didn't recognize at first, but the moment I opened it, everything clicked. A confirmation email from a hotel downtown, a reservation for 2 under a name that wasn't mine, a suite booked for the night. She told me she'd be working late, and then the worst part, the attached invoice paid in cash, but with the email confirmation sent directly to her account, timestamp, dated, undeniable. The rage that hit me was cold, not hot, not explosive, not the kind that makes you flip tables and scream at the walls. It was something sharper, quieter, more dangerous, the kind of anger that doesn't lash out but calculates, the kind that doesn't demand an explanation because it already knows the answer. I stared at the screen for a long time, longer than I probably needed to. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe some small, stupid part of me hoped there was an explanation, some ridiculous loophole that would make this make sense, but there wasn't. There never is. The facts were laid out in black and white, and there was no running from it. I scrolled further down the email thread, my fingers steady, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. There it was, the final nail in the coffin, a response from her confirming the reservation. Thanks for making the arrangements. I can't wait to see you again tonight. I'll bring the wine, wink emoji. I didn't even know she used emojis like that with anyone else. The humiliation that hit me next was quick and sharp like a slap across the face. I was the fool, the idiot who sat across from her at the dinner table while she planned her nights with someone else, the man who kissed her goodbye while she went off to screw another man in a hotel room, the husband who trusted her while she laughed behind my back. But here's the thing about humiliation: it only stings for a moment. After that, it turns into something else, something stronger, something that sharpens your focus, makes you see clearer than you ever have before, and in that clarity, I knew exactly what I needed to do. There would be no confrontation, no screaming match, no pathetic argument where she tries to lie her way out of it. No, I was going to be better than that, smarter than that. I was going to make her regret every single choice that led her here, and I was going to do it in a way she never saw coming. I took screenshots, saved the email thread, backed it up in 3 different places, then I put her tablet back exactly where I found it. No signs that anything had changed, no reason for her to suspect that the game was already over. Then I started making my plans. Because if she thought she was the only one playing a game, she was about to learn exactly what it felt like to lose. I sat there for a long time staring at the evidence, cold, calculated, undeniable, the kind of proof that doesn't allow for excuses or explanations, the kind that turns suspicion into certainty. I could have confronted her right then, and there could have shoved the tablet in her face, watched her scramble for lies, but that would have been too easy, too predictable, too weak. She expected anger, she expected a fight, maybe even expected me to cry, beg, scream, anything that would give her control of the situation. But I don't play by her rules. No, I play to win, and she was about to learn exactly what losing looked like. I thought about her weak spots, the things that mattered most to her, the things she thought were untouchable, her carefully crafted image, the picture-perfect wife, the career woman, the one who always had everything together, her reputation spotless among friends, family, colleagues. The same people who believed every fake smile, every carefully curated social media post, the same people who thought she was something she wasn't. I thought about the man, the one she was meeting, the one she risked everything for. If she was lying to me, she was lying to him too, and I had a feeling he had no idea he was sleeping with a married woman. The plan started forming piece by piece, not rushed, not impulsive, every detail carefully placed, every move leading to the next. It wasn't about ruining her outright, that would have been too simple. It was about precision, about control, about making sure she walked into her own downfall thinking she was safe until it was too late. First, I needed time, space to move without her realizing what was happening, so I acted normal, better than normal. I became the perfect husband, attentive, supportive, patient. I made her feel secure, let her believe she was still ahead of me, still controlling the narrative. I told her she deserved a break, encouraged her to take another night for herself. She smiled, kissed me, told me I was the best husband in the world. I almost laughed. While she was gone, I worked. I gathered everything: emails, messages, location tracking, data, expenses, even small details like receipts she left around the house. Without thinking, anything incriminating went into a neatly organized folder, but evidence wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed to make sure her world crumbled exactly the way I wanted it to. I started with her job. Her career meant everything to her. She had worked for years to build her reputation as the reliable, hard-working woman who could do no wrong, the kind of employee bosses trusted, the kind who gave speeches about integrity and work ethic. I sent an anonymous email to her company, polite, professional, attached with a few select screenshots of her affair, a well-worded concern about inappropriate workplace relationships, the kind that made HR panic and investigate discreetly at first, but not for long. Next, her friends. She had a tight circle, the kind that thrived on gossip, the kind that always talked about other people's scandals, never expecting to be the subject of one themselves. I made sure they found out in the most spectacular way possible, a carefully placed message in their group chat, an accidental leak of her secret, one that spread faster than wildfire, one she couldn't contain. And then the man, the one she was sneaking around with. I did my research, found his social media, found his wife. Yes, his wife, because of course he was married too, because people like her don't just destroy one life, they destroy many. I reached out, sent everything with no message, just the evidence itself. Let the truth speak for itself. By the time she came home, I was already ahead of her, already watching the pieces fall exactly where I wanted them. She walked through the door, kissed me like nothing was wrong, told me about her exhausting night. I smiled, told her I made dinner, poured her a glass of wine, the last peaceful moment she would have before the world she built started to crumble. Because by morning her inbox would be flooded with messages from friends asking if it was true, if she really did what they heard. HR would be pulling her into an uncomfortable meeting where she would be forced to explain why someone had sent them proof of an inappropriate relationship. Her lover would be dealing with his own disaster, his wife now armed with everything she needed to burn his life to the ground. And me, I would be gone, no warning, no argument, just vanish like I was never there, taking everything she thought was hers with me. She thought she was smart, she thought she was in control, but the thing about cheating is that it requires arrogance, the belief that you'll never get caught, the belief that you'll always be one step ahead, and that arrogance is exactly what I used against her. She played a game. Without realizing she was just a pawn in mine, and when the dust settled, when she finally understood what had happened, it would be far too late to do anything about it. She thought she had won. She thought she had outmaneuvered me, slipping through late nights and secret messages with the ease of someone who believed they were untouchable. But the thing about believing you're untouchable is that you stop looking over your shoulder, you stop being careful, you get comfortable, and comfort breeds mistakes. She didn't realize the game had already ended long before she walked through the door that night. I had orchestrated everything with precision, no outbursts, no messy accusations, just a series of events set in motion that she could never undo. The first crack would come from her job. HR had received the anonymous email. By now they had already started digging, and I knew exactly what they would find: late-night expense reports, private meetings, unexplained absences, enough to warrant suspicion, enough to put her under scrutiny. And when they called her into the office for a talk, she would have no answers that didn't sound like lies. Her friends would be next, the same ones she confided in, the same ones who whispered about others behind their backs. I had sent them just enough, just a taste of the truth, carefully selected screenshots and vague messages that would make them desperate for details, and once one person knew, the rest would follow, because people like them, they didn't keep secrets, they feasted on them. Then there was him, the man she had risked everything for. I had made sure his wife knew everything, no warning, no sugarcoating, just the brutal facts handed to her in a way he couldn't ignore. I imagined the confrontation, imagined the way he would scramble for excuses, just like she would when she realized her world was collapsing around her. And finally, the moment I had been waiting for, the final blow, the one that would ensure she couldn't escape. It wasn't enough for me to simply leave. I wanted her to watch it all crumble in real time. So I waited. I let her come home smiling, slipping off her heels, sighing about how exhausting her work had been. I let her sit at the table, let her eat the dinner I had prepared for her, let her drink the wine I poured for her. I watched her relax into the comfort of a life she no longer deserved. Then I pulled out my phone, placed it face up on the table, and slid it toward her. She frowned, at first confused, then her eyes dropped to the screen, and I watched the blood drain from her face as the messages flooded in one after another, rapid fire like bullets shredding through the fragile illusion she had built. Messages from her boss, from her friends, from his wife, from him. Panic widened her eyes, her breathing shallow, her hands frozen above the screen. "What is this?" she whispered, but I didn't answer. I just leaned back, arms crossed, calm, collected, the way a man looks when he already knows how the story ends. Her phone rang. She flinched like the sound had physically struck her. She didn't answer it. She didn't have to. She already knew what was waiting on the other end. She looked at me, then a silent plea in her eyes, one that begged for a lifeline, for an explanation, for mercy. I smiled. And then I stood up and walked away. She scrambled after me, voice breaking, but not with tears, not yet. She was still in denial, still grasping at the frayed edges of her reality. Wait, we can talk about this. Talk, I echoed, pausing at the door, turning just enough to watch her desperation bloom. Talk about what exactly? The hotel, the messages, the fact that you were stupid enough to believe you could get away with it. Her lips parted, but no words came, because what could she say? Sorry, it's not what you think. I can explain. There was nothing left to explain. There was only the truth, and the truth had already ripped her apart. I grabbed my bag, the one I had packed the day before while she was busy betraying me, my keys, my wallet, my phone, and nothing else, because nothing else in this house was mine anymore, not really. She reached for me, one last attempt at salvaging what she had destroyed. Please, she whispered, but the word meant nothing. It carried no weight, no regret, only fear. And it wasn't fear of losing me, it was fear of what came next, fear of the consequences she never thought she'd have to face. I opened the door, stepped outside, and let the cool night air wash over me. I didn't look back, not when she called my name, not when I heard her sob, not when I heard the dull thud of her knees hitting the floor. She had made her choice, and now she was finally understanding what it meant to lose. She stood there, frozen, phone still in her hand, eyes darting across the screen as if she could undo what was already set in motion, as if staring at the messages long enough would make them disappear. Her breathing was uneven, shallow, like someone drowning with no way to reach the surface. She looked up at me, searching for something, anything, but she found nothing, because I had nothing left to give. Her lips parted, but no words came at first, just the sound of her struggling to swallow her own panic, then finally a whisper, barely audible, "Please, just listen to me." I tilted my head, slightly amused by the irony of it all. Listen to her, the woman who had spent months lying, sneaking around, erasing messages, hiding in plain sight, expecting me to believe every excuse she had ever given, and now she wanted to talk, now she wanted to explain. I stayed silent, watched as the weight of it all crashed down on her in real time. Her hands trembled as she reached for me, like she thought there was still a chance, like she could fix this if she just said the right thing. "I can explain," she tried again, voice cracking. "It's not what you think." That made me laugh, not loud, not exaggerated, just a quiet, sharp chuckle, because what else could I do, really? I had heard those words before in 1,000 different stories and 1,000 different betrayals, and yet every single one of them thought they were different, that their lies had some special exception, some loophole that would make their choices justifiable. Not what I think, I repeated, slow, deliberate, measured. Then why don't you tell me what it is? She blinked like she hadn't expected me to call her bluff, like she thought I would just storm out like some broken-hearted fool or scream until my voice gave out. But no, that wasn't who I was. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of emotional chaos. I wasn't going to give her any power in this moment. This was my moment, and she was just the one drowning in it. She opened her mouth and closed it again. She had nothing, not a single excuse that could hold weight in OT anymore. I stepped forward just enough to make her step back, a small shift, but I saw it in her eyes, the fear, the realization that she wasn't in control anymore. You didn't think this through, did you? I said, voice calm, colder than she had ever heard from me. You thought you were careful, that you were untouchable, that I would never figure it out. But the thing about liars is that they always slip up. You know how I found out? It wasn't one thing, it was everything. The perfume, the late nights, the way you flinched every time your phone buzzed. You made it too easy. Her breath hitched, her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't move me. They were tears of fear, not remorse, panic, not guilt. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she had been caught, because the life she had built out of deception was crumbling faster than she could grab the pieces. I stepped past her to the table, picked up her phone, and held it out to her. Want to know what's funny? I asked, tilting the screen so she could see the messages pouring in. Your friends know now, your job knows, his wife definitely knows. So tell me, what exactly do you think happens next? She made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as if that would stop the damage, but it was already done. I watched as she scrolled through her messages, desperate, trying to find something that hadn't fallen apart yet, but all she found were unreadable pieces of a life she could never put back together. Her hands dropped to her side, shoulders shaking. She whispered something so soft I almost didn't hear it. Please. Please, what? I asked, toned even. Do you want me to forgive you, to forget all of this, to pretend like it never happened, so you can keep living the life you threw away? Do you want me to fix this for you? Because I won't. Her tears fell freely, now her legs giving out as she sank to her knees, head down, shaking, hands pressing into the floor like she was begging for the ground to swallow her whole. I walked to the door, picking up my bag without a second glance at her. She didn't deserve my pity. She didn't deserve anything from me anymore. Before I stepped out, I turned back one last time and gave her exactly what she had given me: silence, a void where something should have been, a space where love had once existed but was now gone completely. Then I walked away, leaving her alone with the wreckage she had created, knowing she would never escape it, knowing that every door she once thought was open to her had now been slammed shut forever. I never looked back, not once, not when I walked out that door, not when I heard her sobbing behind me, not when my phone lit up with missed calls and frantic texts that I never bothered to read. I was done with her, with the lies, with the betrayal, with everything she thought she could keep hidden. I had played my part perfectly. I had given her the rope, and she had hung herself with it. Now all that was left was to watch as everything she once held dear slipped right through her fingers. It started at work, just as I planned. HR doesn't ignore reports of inappropriate relationships, not when they involve company expenses, not when they involve a superior and an employee. They didn't fire her outright. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, they put her under investigation, which meant whispers, rumors, long, uncomfortable meetings where she had to explain why her name kept appearing on expense reports linked to hotels that weren't booked for business. She tried to deny it, of course, but denials don't work when you're already drowning in evidence. The investigation took weeks, during which her colleagues, the ones who used to admire her, the ones who once respected her, started keeping their distance. People talk, they always do, and once the whispers started, there was no stopping them. The office became colder, emails became short-clipped, interactions became strained. She wasn't fired in the end, she quit, or rather she had no choice, because by the time HR was done, she was untouchable in her industry, her reputation in ruins. Then there were her friends, or at least the people she called friends. They turned on her faster than she expected. One by one, they dropped out of her life, some outright cutting her off, some doing it quietly, avoiding her texts, canceling plans, offering weak excuses, until eventually she was left with no one, because no one wants to be associated with a liar, with a cheater, with someone who so blatantly destroyed the life she had built. Her family wasn't much different. Her parents were humiliated, ashamed. They had always prided themselves on raising a daughter who was responsible, loyal, trustworthy. Now, they had to face the truth that she was none of those things. Her mother stopped calling, As often her father didn't bother hiding his disappointment, her younger sister, the one who had always looked up to her, refused to even speak to her. And him, the man she thought was worth throwing it all away for, he disappeared faster than she could even process. His wife left him, took everything in the divorce, made sure he felt the consequences just as much as my wife did. He didn't fight it, he couldn't, he had nothing left to stand on, and whatever they had, whatever twisted fantasy they convinced themselves was worth it, crumbled under the weight of reality. She had no one now, not even him. I made sure of that. As for me, I moved on, not just physically but mentally, emotionally, completely. She had expected me to be broken, to be shattered. But I wasn't. She had expected me to be just another man left in the wreckage of her choices, but I wasn't. I took my time, set myself up for a life that was better, freer without her in it. I didn't just leave, I thrived. And she was stuck exactly where I left her, in the ruins of her own making, forced to live with the consequences of every decision she thought she'd never have to pay for, forced to watch as everything she once had slipped through her fingers with no way to get it back. She tried to reach out once, months later, a pathetic attempt at closure, or maybe a desperate plea for some semblance of forgiveness, but I never responded. She didn't deserve my words, my time, my attention. She had already taken enough from me, and I wasn't about to give her anything else. In the end, she lost everything, and I lost nothing, because the truth is she was never a loss to begin with, just a mistake, a lesson, and now a memory that no longer had the power to hurt me. I never saw her again, not in person at least, but I knew exactly what became of her. People talk even when you don't ask, even when you've erased someone from your life completely, their name still finds its way back to you like an echo of a past you no longer care about, and that's what she was to me now, an echo, a cautionary tale, a ghost trapped in the wreckage of her own making. I heard she tried to move to a new city, thought a fresh start would somehow cleanse the stain of what she'd done, but people like her don't start over, not really. They just run, hoping the past doesn't catch up, but it always does, because you can't outrun your own reflection. Her career was gone. No one in her industry wanted to take a risk on someone with a reputation for mixing business with pleasure. Too many whispers, too many raised eyebrows, too much doubt. Employers don't like doubt, they don't like scandals, they don't like people who bring baggage to the office. She tried smaller firms, lower positions, but it was never the same, never what she once had, because trust once broken is nearly impossible to rebuild. She used to love the attention, the admiration, the respect. Now all she got were side glances and quiet conversations that stopped the moment she walked into her room. Her friends, the ones who used to hang on her every word, were nowhere to be found. People love a winner, but they abandon the fallen. She had become social poison, a reminder of what happens when you get caught, when the truth you thought you could bury refuses to stay dead. And her family, the ones who once saw her as their pride and joy, now struggled to even look at her without disappointment in their eyes. She had built a life on lies, and when those lies collapsed, they buried her beneath them. And me, I didn't just walk away, I walked ahead. I built a life so far removed from her that sometimes I almost forgot she existed. I didn't waste time wondering if she regretted it, because regret only matters when it changes something, and nothing about her situation could be changed. The damage was done. She was left with nothing, and that was exactly what she deserved. But sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet, I wonder, did she ever think it was worth it? Did she ever sit alone in some tiny apartment staring at the walls, wondering how she got there? Did she ever replay every lie, every excuse, every betrayal, and realize that she destroyed everything for nothing? Did she ever think back to the moment she decided I wasn't enough, and ask herself if it was the worst mistake of her life? I don't wonder because I care, I wonder because I know the answer, and I know she does too. So now I ask you, what would you have done if you had been in my place, if you had uncovered the lies, if you had found the proof, if you had realized that the person you trusted the most had been deceiving you all along? Would you have walked away without a word, or would you have done what I did, made sure she felt the consequences, made sure she understood that betrayal has a price that cannot be undone? I don't regret anything, not a single moment, not a single decision, but I wonder if you were standing where I stood, looking at the truth staring back at you, what would you have done? Bye-bye.